It happened on a Saturday morning. Sarah and my daughter had gone to art class, and I stayed home, the coffee maker humming in the kitchen, and I was automatically scrolling through my Facebook feed. Nothing out of the ordinary, photos of my colleagues' children, political memes, recipes that no one ever makes. Then suddenly, a photo that left me literally speechless. The photo was taken in a spacious banquet hall, gold balloons, long tables with white tablecloths, a multi-tiered birthday cake, and most importantly, a large silver banner in the background. Happy 60th, Dad. My father, Gerald, stood in the center, smiling, in a new navy jacket with a glass in his hand. My sister Rachel hugged him. My younger brother Dave and his wife stood next to him, then cousins, aunts, uncles, even our old neighbors from Maryland. I didn't need to scroll any further to realize one thing. Everyone was there, except me. At first I froze. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I could barely hear the coffee maker humming. I reloaded the feed. Then again. Maybe it was an old photo? But the date under the post was fresh. Yesterday. I hadn't received an invitation, not a single call, not even a fucking text. I sat in a chair at the kitchen table, staring at my phone screen. I checked my email, checked my spam, even my call history. Nothing. Absolute silence. Was I just crossed out? Anger surged like an explosion. I grabbed the phone and called Rachel. "Hi," she said after the second ring. Her voice was cautious. She already knew why I was calling. "Are you serious?" I said without even saying hello. "They threw Dad a party for his 60th birthday and didn't tell me." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she sighed. "Nick, it wasn't my decision. We thought you'd be embarrassed after everything." "After everything? What are you talking about?" "About you and Richard." Her voice dropped even lower. "Mom said it was best not to make it complicated. Just a small gathering for the closest." "For the closest?" I almost screamed. "You invited Aunt Marcia, who hasn't seen Dad since 2005, but crossed me off the list?" "It wasn't personal," she began. "I'm sorry, but what do you call it then?" She fell silent again. Then she said the phrase that killed me. "We just thought you wouldn't mind." "I wouldn't mind? You excluded me from my father's anniversary, and you thought I wouldn't mind?" I hung up before I could say anything I would regret. I sat in silence for a long time after the conversation. Sarah came back from class with Ella, and I tried to act normal, but she immediately noticed that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked when we were alone in the kitchen. I showed her the photo. She looked at me, then at her. "They didn't invite you?" I nodded silently. "It's just wrong," she said. "Didn't they say anything at all?" "Nothing. I first learned about it from the news. I went into the living room and turned on the TV, but I didn't see or hear anything. My mind was racing with thoughts like, this is a mistake. Maybe they wanted to call but didn't have time. Maybe something went wrong. But I knew it was a deliberate exclusion, and to be honest, this wasn't the first time. My family has always had a strange idea about loyalty. Everything was built on tacit acceptance. If you don't agree, you're a problem. If you honestly express your emotions, you're dramatizing. 5 years ago, I had a fight with Richard, my mother's new husband. He made a disparaging remark about Sarah, and I didn't hold back. The family dinner ended in a scandal. Everyone expected me to apologize. I didn't. Since then, they have increasingly forgotten to include me in family events. Now, they have crossed me out for good. The next day, I called my mother. She answered in a gentle, slightly tired tone. "Hello, dear." "Mom, why wasn't I invited to Dad's anniversary?" Silence. Then she exhaled. "It was difficult. We didn't know if you would want to come after." "Mom, don't be silly. I wanted to. I always want to. I am his son." "We didn't want any conflicts. Richard and his relatives were there, and—" "Richard." Again. Is it because of him that I wasn't invited to my own father's birthday? It's not just because of him. It's just, you can be too sharp sometimes, Nick. And we didn't want anything to spoil the atmosphere. I'm not the atmosphere. I'm not the emotional background. I'm your son. She was silent, then said quietly, Don't make a tragedy out of it. And then I realized, for them it's not a tragedy. But for me it is. I couldn't sleep that night. For hours I lay in the dark, listening to time pass by. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Sarah slept next to me, my daughter breathing peacefully in her room. And instead of feeling calm, I only sank deeper into anger, resentment, shame, and disappointment. This wasn't about one holiday anymore. It was about years. Years of accumulated unspoken truth. For years I was ignored, forced to apologize, confined to the framework of, you're older, you should be wiser, don't blow your mind, don't spoil everyone's mood. I kept quiet, I accepted. And now, enough. In the morning I got up before the alarm clock. In the kitchen I made myself coffee, opened my laptop and started writing. Not for social networks, not for other people's eyes. And the letter that I will send to everyone who is affected. To my mother, Rachel, Dave, my father himself. No swearing, no tantrums, just the truth. So, hello everyone. You will probably be surprised to receive this letter, but it is important for me to say everything right away, while I can still speak calmly. I found out about my father's anniversary from the news feed. Photos, videos, toasts, hugs, all without me. At first I was shocked. Then came resentment, then anger, and this morning, peace. And I want to use that peace to share. I've learned a lot in the past 5 years. For example, how to build a career without support, how to raise a child without advice from a mother, how to remain present even when others choose your absence. When my father was sick, I came to the hospital. When Rachel was getting divorced, I took care of her child while she cried in the bathroom. When Dave couldn't pay for the dorm, I gave money without demanding anything in return. But now I understand. I shouldn't have expected reciprocity. It's all about choices. And you made yours. You decided that my presence wasn't enough, that my voice was superfluous, that my conflict with Richard was more important than my relationship with my father. So, I make a choice too. No more trying to fit in. No more explaining. No more waiting for an invitation. I don't stop being a son. But I won't be an outsider in my own life anymore. Good luck with your family events, without me. Nick. I reread the letter 3 times. My hands were shaking, not out of fear, out of inner liberation. For the first time, I didn't bend. I didn't apologize for the tone. I didn't ask permission. I pressed send. The reaction came quickly. Rachel called first. I didn't answer. Then, Mom. Then, Rachel again. Then the messages came. Are you seriously sending this? It was just an anniversary. You could have had a calm conversation instead of posting drama. That's unfair to Mom. She tries for everyone. Dad is really upset now. He didn't even know you weren't invited. The last message stopped me in my tracks. Didn't he know? That changed everything. Dad and I were never very close. He was the kind of father who showed love through actions, not words. But he wasn't cruel, and he certainly wouldn't have cut me off intentionally. I couldn't resist and called him. He answered after a few rings. Hello, Nick? Hi, Dad. Did you get my letter? Yes, I did. His voice was quiet. I didn't know, honestly. I thought you were just out of reach, like always. They told me you were busy at work. I was silent. Then, finally, he said, No one called me. No one texted me. I found out about the party on Facebook. God, he breathed. This is disgusting. Dad, why didn't you call me yourself? I thought it was your decision, that you were offended and I was struck out, and no one thought to clarify why. He fell silent. Only his breathing was audible. Then he said, I'll clean it up, I promise. It won't happen again. A few days later, I got another letter, from my mom. It was written in her usual tone, passive aggression wrapped in concern. Nick, I read your letter. It's hurtful, for everyone. You have a right to your feelings, but don't hurt the people who love you. I didn't mean to exclude you. I was just trying to stay out of trouble. That doesn't mean we don't love you, but sometimes you isolate yourself. You've always been difficult. We didn't know what to do. difficult. That's who I was to my mom. Not a son, not a grown man to be respected, just difficult. I didn't answer, because now I knew. My answer was my limits. For the first time, I hadn't let guilt eat me up from the inside. And even though it hurt, it was necessary. 2 weeks after the letter, Sarah and I flew to San Diego. Without any fuss, without permission or excuses, just to escape for a few days, to get inspired. I didn't take my work laptop with me. I didn't check my messengers. On the beach, Ella ran around with a bucket and built sandcastles. Sarah sunbathed and read. And I just sat. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was. Not a son, not a brother, not a difficult relative, a person who deserved silence and peace and respect, even if it had to be built on the ruins of an old relationship. A little more than 2 weeks passed after my letter. The family, although they didn't express themselves more directly, continued to silently stew in their own disappointment. On Facebook, there was silence. Not a single like under my posts, no calls. They couldn't say that I didn't have a right to my feelings. But, as always, they decided it was easier to be offended than to admit they had crossed the line. I thought that was all. But an unexpected call this morning changed everything. Sarah woke me up. "Dad, someone's here. They're waiting for you." I hadn't even realized what she'd said when I saw Dad in the doorway. He was standing there with his suitcase, in his dark gray jacket, a little thin, his eyes full of fatigue. "Hello?" he said quietly. "Can I come in?" I nodded silently. A million thoughts were racing through my head. What is he doing here? Why is he here? How did he find my new home? He sat down at the kitchen table, carefully setting down the coffee cup that I had placed in front of him as if it were a minefield. "I came alone, without Mom, without drama. I just want to talk, like a human." "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." Dad sighed. "You know, I've reread your letter 5 times, every sentence. And each time I found myself thinking that I didn't know when I stopped listening to you. Maybe when you first said you felt useless, and I said, 'Don't exaggerate.' Or when you didn't come home for Christmas 3 years ago, and my mom and I thought that was typical." "I was working the night shift," I reminded her, "and my mom said, 'No one was really expecting you anyway.'" He nodded. The memory seemed to hurt him too. "I'm not making excuses, it's just, I've also learned what it's like to be crossed out. After your letter, I felt for the first time what it's like to have no voice. And it hurts, damn it." I looked at him for a long time. His hands were shaking a little. His eyes were older than they had been a few weeks ago. "Why did you come alone?" "Because Mom doesn't want to admit she did something wrong. She always tried to keep everything under control. And when someone gets out of the picture, she just erases." I agreed with my gaze. That's what I felt. "I can't make you come back, but I want to say that you weren't superfluous. Never. Even if we didn't show it. Maybe we were just too selfish to see you drown while we were splashing around in the water." He fell silent. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. "I never wanted anything in particular," I finally said. "Just knowing that my efforts are noticed. That I'm not a hard worker in the background. That I'm not to blame for every conflict, just because I speak out loud." Dad looked up. "That's fair. And Mom? She's not ready. But I'm here. And I want to build something new. Not the old picture where everything is perfect, but the real thing. If you let me." It got to me. Not to tears. I haven't cried in a long time. But to feel that at least someone is not afraid to admit their guilt was something new and valuable. "Okay," I said. "Stay for a few days." The next morning I woke up to the smell of coffee. Dad was brewing it the way he had loved it since my school days. Strong, without sugar, with a pinch of cinnamon. Sarah was already telling him something about school, and for the first time in a long time, I heard her laugh in a dialogue with her grandfather. We went for a walk along the waterfront together. We talked about music, new movies, joked, and at some point he stopped. "Nick, I have something to ask of you," Just please don't say no right away. Tell me. Come with me to Brooklyn for a day. You'll see the rest, but not as a guest, but as a person who has something to say. I thought. I felt a twinge inside me again. I knew I was taking a risk. But now I was different, and this time, I wasn't going to keep quiet. Okay, one day. But no surprises. He smiled. None. We arrived on Saturday. The living room was already buzzing with excitement before I even stepped through the door. Mom was standing in the kitchen, seemingly by chance. Dave was in the corner with the phone. Rachel was with her arms crossed. Hi, I said. Hi, Mom said. Rachel spoke first. I read your letter. And you were right. I was a bastard. And to be honest, I was a little jealous. You managed to hold on, to be separate. And I always stuck up for everyone because I was afraid they would forget me. I never wanted to be separate, I replied. But no one gave me a choice. Dave nodded. I just didn't want to stir up trouble. But it was cowardice. And I can see that. I looked at them, and for the first time I didn't feel like a stranger. Maybe it was because I didn't want to blend in anymore. I stood my ground. And now, if someone wanted to be around, they had to come up themselves. Mom was silent. Then she came closer. Her eyes were moist. I don't know if I can change, but I want to try. I nodded. You don't have to promise. Just start listening. The house was filled with the smell of cinnamon and ginger. My mother had apparently decided it would be appropriate to bake the cake she had once made for my birthday. It must have been her silent sorry. I noticed it as soon as I walked into the kitchen, and everything mixed inside me. The warmth of memories and the cold of disappointment. Can we talk? She asked, not turning around. Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid I would say no. I nodded silently. We sat in the living room. Around me were family photos, many of which I hadn't seen in years. Here I was in 6th grade. Here my dad and I were at Christmas. Here we were all together at the lake. Except for me. I wasn't in the last ones. I don't know where to begin, Mom admitted, lowering her eyes. I've made a lot of mistakes, and the worst of them is probably not listening to you when I was little. I just thought you were strong, that you could handle it. Why did you think being strong meant I didn't need anything? I asked. My voice was calm, but I was getting nervous. Because I saw you silently do everything yourself. Even as a child, you never asked. And I might just be tired of being needed. Rachel was a more difficult child, more emotional. She demanded a lot. Attention, support, apologies, and you just were. You mean I was just a background? She flinched. No, that's not what I meant. I guess I thought that since you weren't screaming, you were okay. That's not an excuse, Mom. It's convenient. It's easier to pay attention to the one who demands and forget about the one who keeps quiet. But silence is also a scream. It's just quieter, she nodded. Her eyes were moist, but she was holding back tears. I was being dishonest with myself, and with you. When Emily decided not to invite you, I felt it was wrong. But I didn't interfere. I didn't want to fight before the wedding. I didn't want to be the one to ruin everything. And instead of taking your side, I just kept quiet. Like you for years. I didn't answer. Her words made my chest feel empty and heavy, and at the same time, something softened there. For the first time, she wasn't denying responsibility. She wasn't making excuses. She saw. Why did she do it? I finally asked. Why was I unnecessary? Mom sighed. She said she was afraid you would bring tension, that you were too serious, and that this day should only be for happy people. I told her she was wrong, but I didn't insist, because I was used to you enduring it. That is, again, I have to endure. Be an adult. No more. It doesn't work anymore. If you see something and remain silent, you are not just a witness. You are an accomplice. Her lips trembled. I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I haven't forgotten about you, I just accepted that you are always alone. And it's my fault. We sat in silence. There was no music, no TV, just two voices, finally reaching a real conversation. When I was 10, I said, I was sitting in a room with a temperature of 40, and I heard you running with tea to Rachel. And they just threw me an antipyretic and said, you'll do it. And I did. But I never asked for anything again. She closed her eyes. God, she whispered. I don't even remember that. And I remember. I remember every little thing that made me realize that I was alone. And the worst part wasn't that you were cruel. You were indifferent. And that was even worse. Mom finally couldn't hold back. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't know how to be different. I grew up in a family where there was no talking. Only duties, discipline, results. And I passed that on to you. But you should have gotten something different. You had the right. Forgive me. I didn't say I'm sorry, not because I didn't want to, but because forgiveness is not a word, it's a path. I've been on this path. But I'm not ready to call it the end. I stood up. I don't know what's going to happen next, but thank you for saying it. She nodded. I'm going to try to be different, for myself, and for you. If you can ever call me again. We'll see, I said. That night I went for a walk in Brooklyn alone. The streets my sister and I used to ride our bikes on. The old graffiti. The old music store that was now a cafe. Everything had changed. And so had I. When I got back to my parents' house, my dad was already asleep. Sarah was under the covers on the old couch, and a new notification was flashing on my phone. A message from Emily. The phone was in my lap. The message was short, almost dry, without unnecessary emotion. Hi. I don't know what to say. If you can, please read the letter. I'll send it to the post office. This is not an excuse, just an explanation. Emily. I opened the email a few minutes later. The subject line only had my name. A letter from Emily. I'm sorry I didn't tell you this to your face, but I know that if I start talking, I'll either cry or run away, and writing is easier. This isn't about making excuses. It's about something that should have been said a long time ago. You were always better than me. I knew it when I was a child. You were calm, intelligent, independent. I was compared to you, and I always felt like I didn't measure up. Maybe you didn't want it to be this way, but I lived in the shadow of your right image. I remember how you helped me pack my suitcase when I ran away from my first boyfriend. How you silently drove me to interviews because I was scared to go alone. How you lent me money without asking when I would pay it back. And when it was time for the wedding, I just decided to be the main one. Not perfect, not a shadow, not a little sister. I wanted to have a day where nothing reminded me that I was less. That I always needed someone. That without you, I was nothing. It was selfish, maybe even cruel. But I told myself that this day had to be mine, even if it cost you. The wedding didn't work out. People were fighting. Your support wasn't enough. Mom walked like a broken clock. I stood in a dress and it seemed to me that I was naked, because the person closest to me just left. And I realized, I'm alone. And when you're not around, loneliness isn't quiet, it's loud. Forgive me, not for the canceled invitation, for the years I put myself above, for not knowing how to say to you, thank you, and I'm scared, and you're my hero. I'm not asking you to come, but if you ever forgive me, I'll wait. Emily. I reread that letter 3 times, first with a sense of anger, then with sadness, and then with a strange, quiet emptiness. There was a lot of confession in those words, but even more of wasted time. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like I was getting something back that I was missing. But I felt a weight lift, not from my heart, from my shoulders. I no longer carried her guilt. She had finally taken it. The next morning I packed up. My mother had left an envelope on the kitchen table with the words, "In case we never see each other again." I didn't open it, not right away. It wasn't a drama. It was a way to save the moment for later, when I was ready. I went outside. The wind smelled of spring and smoke. I stopped at a taxi, looked back at the house where I grew up, and left. On the plane, I sat by the window. The landscapes under the wing were incredible. Somewhere down there, people, dramas, letters, weddings. And here, the sky, the sun, a sip of white wine, and the thought, I am not broken. I have simply become different. When I stepped onto the warm sand of the Caribbean coast again, the waves greeted me as if they had been waiting. I allowed myself to relax. Walks at dawn. Calm silence without calls. Favorite books, no drama, no apologies. Just me, the sea, and freedom. A few days later, on the terrace of my apartment, I opened my laptop and wrote Emily a reply. I read your letter. Thank you for finally saying it out loud. I was also guilty of not speaking. We both hid behind a silence that grew like a wall. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe one day we can be brother and sister again, not by birth, but by choice. But right now, I'm just living. And you live too. Not for me. For yourself? Your brother. I clicked send, then closed my laptop, and for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep easily. Not all stories have happy endings, but some do have honest ones. I didn't return to my family with hugs. We didn't all sit down at the festive table together. I didn't forgive everything at once. And I didn't receive all the love that was so lacking. But I chose not to be the version of myself I was forced to play. Comfortable, silent, eternally strong. I became a person who takes my hand and brings me into the light, without the consent of others, without permission, and that is enough.